Well, hey everyone, it's Andy Prisco at Jumpstart Mastery. In June of 2024, Jumpstart Mastery brought together Gary Noesner, founder of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit and lead negotiator at Waco, and Jack Cambria, longest standing commander of NYPD's hostage negotiation team, to engage in a long form educational series of discussions regarding crisis negotiation. And I had the privilege of facilitating that discussion. These conversations invariably lead to curiosity that leaders and managers might have about implementing meaningful crisis negotiation and crisis de-escalation programming in their agency or system. Please do not hesitate, if you have that feeling, to contact us at Jumpstart Mastery by emailing info@jumpstartmastery.com. We would be more than happy to see how we can explore bringing the icons to your leadership team, management team, senior executives to assist you in the ongoing culture change and transformation that our systems so desperately need in supporting people who present discontrol, dysregulation, and crisis. Thank you. Why is negotiation relevant? Why are we here? Why are the three of us together? In my work in addressing and solving the violence problem in psychiatric care and services that began many years ago, where the kind of violence that shows up in the healthcare system and in the behavioral health community systems, this is very acute and tantamount to the kinds of events that our public safety systems have to manage throughout the nation. And in a desire to understand how this work was being done at the very best levels it could be, my research led me to three people. The great Greg Smith from Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, who's not here with us today, to Gary Noesner, and to Jack Cambria. This was in an interest to help resolve the extraordinary number of containment procedures that were occurring in a care system in which I was directly involved and responsible to reduce, but also to attend to the training needs of a workforce that desperately needed something more than what they were getting. And it was through hearing the anecdotes, the stories, the events that both of you have engaged in your respective fields. Gary, you with the FBI, Jack, you with the NYPD. I grew up listening to your voice on the news. And I don't think there's a person in the United States who doesn't have some working knowledge of what happened at Waco. And for the both of you who already knew each other very well by the time I got in contact with you, for both of you to be willing, after some years of discussions and development, to come here and talk about these principles that we've learned we all cherish, that we all know work, that we all know are desperately needed, and for strange reasons, not the first choice many times, very often, in how we engage people that can present discontrol, dysregulation, anger, and go to extremities in their behavior to get their needs met. Your willingness to come here and provide, in my view, what would be described as legacy level, meaningful education that people will find accessible, valuable, that anybody, whether in the professional negotiation sense or someone who's just curious about this domain, will find value in. We're very grateful to you. So thank you for your willingness to be
It's
here.
great to be here.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you.
When you consider, both of you represent over 70 years in professional negotiation experience in very, very high risk domains. You've traversed a long stretch of geography managing not just the events, but programs, systems, leaders, other parts of the world on this topic. what makes you still to this day so passionate about sharing this knowledge with the world, would you say? Gary, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, it's the field of negotiations has had a significant life-saving impact, not just on hostages and victims, as the case may be, but in saving the lives of police officers. Because if we can diffuse tense, dangerous situations, that then sets up a situation where police officers do not have to enter a dangerous situation. We want our people to go home every night. We certainly want to save innocent life, but most importantly, we don't needlessly throw our lives or devalue our lives doing something reckless and unnecessary. So that's why back in the 70s, when NYPD came up with this concept, our dear friend Frank Boltz and Harvey Schlossberg, now deceased, came up with a method. Instead of charging in like we did in the old days, let's contain the situation, let's open a dialogue, let's contrast the benefits of cooperation versus the risks of resistance. And that was the beginnings of a very effective, purposeful approach to dealing with a whole range of crisis events. That initial growth was expanded. We expanded some up with the FBI and other departments. We learned from each other, trial and error. The whole field really grew out of a necessity on law enforcement agencies to handle these situations more effectively, more safely. And it's had a profound impact. I don't know that there are any statistics that really adequately address the thousands and thousands of lives have been saved because of this approach.
It's almost impossible to collect that kind of data.
It doesn't exist.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think we would agree that while it is life-saving, while it is effective, while it was born out of necessity, isn't it interesting that people must be trained in something like this, that it doesn't come naturally to everybody, and that many people want to defer to charging in and control? What do you think about that, Jack, when you think about the conversion of your agency, because you were around when it started, the conversion of your agency from just going in to engaging in dialogue, trying to engender trust, engender collaboration, and then resolve things peaceably. It took a long time to get these principles to become appreciated by a large workforce.
Sure. So I wasn't around at the onset of the concept of hostage negotiations, which Gary pointed out did start in the NYPD based on a series of 4 different events specifically. Very briefly, it was the Attica prison riots. That was back in 1971. The end result of that was 39 people, mostly prisoners, but also correction officers, were killed. And the correction officers that were killed were the result of police bullets, when they tried to take over the back to prison. So the NYPD looked at that, but considered it's hundreds of miles from the borders of New York City. We know about it, but didn't really impact too much. Fast forward to the August of 1972, and they made a movie out of this incident called Dog Day Afternoon. It was a bank robbery starring Al Pacino. But it was a true-to-life type of zany kind of bank robbery. It lasted some 12 hours. And
it was a great movie.
And a tactical application when they went from point A, the bank, which was in Brooklyn, to point B, which is JFK Airport, when the FBI had a tactical intervention with that, and it was over at that point. 1 month later, and this is what the NYPD seriously looked at, was the Munich Olympic massacre.
Right.
Where 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed after 5 different Palestinian terrorists entered into the dormitories housing the Israeli athletes and coaches, and then the result of that was 11 were killed, right, including a police officer and those 5 terrorists. So it was at that point, we had a chief in the NYPD named Simon Eisdorfer, who was of the Jewish faith, and he was watching these events as they were unfolding very carefully. He approached the police commissioner at the time, a guy by the name of Patrick V. Murphy, and said, "Commissioner, this is something that could very easily happen in New York City. We have a very large Jewish population. We should have detectives trained as hostage negotiators." He liked the idea. He goes, "Put something together, bring it back to me," and so we did. And so the hostage negotiation team was born. So Gary mentioned Dr. Harvey Schlossberg was also Detective Harvey Schlossberg.
And we're all still very friendly with
his wife, Tony.
Tony.
Yes. And they tapped him. He was with the psychological psychological unit of the NYPD, and they tapped him and they said to him, put together some guidelines for hostage taking. So Harvey said at the time, well, that's not what I really do. I see clients one-on-one, and a typical NYPD
But he was
response.
a wellness guy.
Yeah.
He was serving the workforce.
That's right.
Right.
And Harvey's, after Harvey said, I don't really do that, typical NYPD response is, well, do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so he did some research and he put together these guidelines, which are still practiced today through probably every hostage team across the world. And then they started the process of training captains and above around that time, which is, mid to late 1972. And then in January of 1973 was the final incident that kind of sealed the fate of the hostage team would be born. And that was an incident that happened in Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It was a sporting goods store. A radical group at the time goes in, they rob guns and money, for their cause, and they're interrupted by the police, and it winds up being a 47-hour hostage siege with one of our police officers from emergency service, a man by the name of Stephen Gilroy, was killed, and also 2 other police officers were shot, and one of the perpetrators was shot as well. And it was finally over after, 47 hours, and thus the hostage team was born. When the team was actually formulated, it met with a lot of resistance, as you can imagine, from hardened, old-time police officers and bosses and so on. Negotiate with perpetrators? We don't do that. So prior to 1973, a lot of police agencies would give a hostage taker a set amount of time to surrender, and if they did not, then they would be met with tactical force. So this was a new concept in policing, which met with a lot of resistance. Then enter, who Gary mentioned, also Frank Bowles, who was a lieutenant at the time, later on went to become a captain, who's still very much with us. He's 94 years old. I just had lunch with him actually 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And he had the charismatic personality to sell this. And the media was all over him because it's this new concept. And thus the hostage team was born. So based on the model that was developed with us, NYPD, followed right after that by the FBI, taking a look at it. Let's take a look at that. And based on when the FBI took it on, then many other law enforcement agencies across the United States adopted this model of hostage negotiations. And now probably everywhere in the world, every police agency across the world has a version of a hostage negotiation team, or the FBI changed the name. It's more descriptive, the FBI's name of it, which is Crisis Negotiation Unit.
Yeah.
More descriptive of the work that we do, but being we were the first, and it was titled at the time, we kept that as a tradition.
Yeah. Well, the FBI's journey is kind of similar. We had the famous Downs versus United States case. It's a hijacking in Jacksonville, Florida, not far from where I was raised. And it was a small plane, and a guy hijacked, he had a pilot, and I think his former wife or something like that. I don't remember the particulars. Anyway, the FBI contained the situation, and to stop the guy from taking off at one point in time, they shot the tires out of the plane. And this guy then triggered homicide, suicide, so everybody died. And there was a major lawsuit. The FBI, this is the extent of which you were able to manage a case, just shooting the tires out. So we quickly went to NYPD. And the story I always tell, I'm not sure how true it is that NYPD came to us and said, this is what we developed. What do you think? And we said, it's exactly what we do. And shame on us in the FBI if we didn't recognize something that was really good and really effective. And with our psychologists and our behavioral people and so forth, we were able, I think, to carry that message, started in New York and carry it out around the country and overseas. And then the feedback from departments who were beginning to do this, the lessons learned, we shouldn't do this, and this causes a problem when we do that. And then slowly growing a curriculum and a philosophy that most likely would lead to success in achieving the kind of peaceful outcomes we want.
Sure.
I mean, after the Waco incident, the Attorney General asked the FBI, what are your national statistics? And we go, national statistics? So we developed the hostage barricade database. And there's thousands and thousands of cases collected from all over the United States now. And what that essentially shows is the success rate of negotiations is above 90 percentile. Now, you tell me what else in law enforcement achieves that level of success? Almost nothing. So it's quite an effective program. It's proven. But despite that, we still are met with some resistance among some in law enforcement. And we'll talk about that more later. But I think the audience should always remember law enforcement is paramilitary. And we are action-oriented people. We are trained to identify a problem, solve the problem and move on to the next problem.
Yeah.
So for police all of a sudden to embrace this concept of slowing down, taking our
Yeah.
time, investing an effort
Yeah.
into creating a relationship where we can influence behavior, it still meets with some resistance in some
It
departments.
does. Yeah.
So hence this kind of training hopefully will help combat that lingering doubts
Yeah.
in the very effective approach we all have.
Guys, I don't think this is, I don't think the market is cornered on the resistance to the approach just in the public safety domain. The notion of wanting to defer to control or use of force exists in corrections, jails, and prisons.
Sure.
It exists in institutions.
Foreign policy.
Yeah, it exists at
Sounds all over.
everywhere. And I mean, clearly there are three advocates of this approach at this table, but each of us have encountered, even in the face of the positive outcomes, resistance. In my particular domain, what we programmatically were able to do was reduce the use of seclusion or mechanical restraint in the management of people presenting emergency a considerable degree. I mean, considerable. We were using hundreds of hours a week of these practices in the management of people. And we were able to reduce that to almost negligible levels for a period of time. And you would think everybody would be thrilled. It's safer, people are getting along, people are demonstrating what would be described as patience and mercy with one another. And there were entire factions of workforce members that were not happy with this. They were not happy with the negotiation element interfering in their decision making to determine if control should be used or not.
It enters a level of complexity that people are uncomfortable with. They want black and white, good, bad.
Yeah.
He's behaving bad, we're good, boom. We're gonna
Yes.
force our will on them. This requires more thought, more nuance. Life is gray. We know that. It's not black and white.
Yep.
And it's a soft science, as it were. So Jack and I probably spent most of our career negotiating with our bosses.
Yes. Yes.
While
Leadership.
our team is negotiating with Mr. or Mrs. Bad Guy,
Right.
we're saying, boss, here's why we do it this way. This is what we have learned through experience, and this is the most likely pathway for us to be successful. And we were usually successful in convincing bosses to maybe we should listen to these people. But it's still a challenge.
To your point, Gary, when I first got the position as the commander of the hostage negotiation team in New York City, they said, "Congratulations, Lieutenant Cambria, you're now the chief negotiator for the NYPD." I said, "Oh, that sounds pretty cool. I guess that means I can negotiate anytime I want, right?"
Oh,
They said, no, that's not what chief negotiator means. It means you get to negotiate with the chief. So to your point, and mostly that's what it was.
Many people know the challenges that the FBI faced at Waco, and
Oh, yeah.
a lot of those challenges, we're not talking to Mr. Malignant Narcissist David Koresh, but me having to deal with FBI management on the scene. And I used to tell the negotiation team, what you guys are doing is predictable. We know about people like David Koresh. We know what their motivation is, their behavior. You try dealing with what I have to deal with is the front office up there and some of their thinking about getting this resolved. So, yeah, it's a constant struggle, and personnel change all the time.
Yeah.
You may have a decision maker who's just terrific and understands how to support tactics and negotiations and how they integrate. And then you get the next person in and they have no idea and they want to do it their way.
So then let me just shoot this in, guys. So the capacity to upward manage why negotiation, why less restriction initially may be advisable, the need to articulate that to leadership that might not be sensitive to it seems to be, from your description, an absolutely prerequisite skill you had to have. Otherwise, if you weren't able to articulate to leadership, the default decision would be, well, negotiation lasted 60 seconds, we're going to control now. Or we're just going to lead with control because we observe these conditions. Whereas you had to intervene not only with the person served or the subject, you had to intervene with leadership to say, I'm here representing a paradigm change. Even though you're not, that's implied, you're not saying that, but you're making the case and describing what is to be gained by negotiating.
You have to be a strong advocate.
Oh, yeah.
I used to tell negotiation team leaders when I would teach a course for leadership in negotiations, I said, if you sit with the negotiation team and the command post is over there where the decision maker is, you're going to be like the Maytag repairman. Nobody's going to come call.
Yeah.
What should I be thinking about? What's important?
Right.
You've got to get off your duff and go over there and make sure the boss is completely informed of what you're doing, where you're headed, what sort of support you need, what sort of coordination you need with the tactical team. Because don't expect them to know the things that you know.
That's right.
The thing that helped me more than anything else, I suspect, Jack, is while being operational, but also being an instructor, allowed me to use my instructional, experiences and knowledge to basically teach a commander on the scene.
Right.
Here's the reasons we don't do this. Here's the reasons we always do this. This increases our probabilities and so forth and so on. Yes, the subject lied to us. All right. That's not unexpected.
Right.
Don't overreact to that.
Right. Let's not have everyone's needle move because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I found, because I still teach hostage negotiations, I've been doing so for about 10 years across the country.
Yes.
And even internationally. But what I've found across the U.S. is that, and these are all informal surveys, so there's no real research analysis that's put into it, but just from speaking to the classes throughout the country. And what I'm getting is that if their agency head, so their police chief, their sheriff, in my case, it would have been the commissioner, if they came through the ranks as part of the tactical team, they were SWAT operative coming up, now that they're in a command role,
that's their orientation.
Yeah, that's the orientation.
It shaped their lens. Yeah.
And the opposite they say is true as well. If they're, they're commanders now, they're chiefs, they're, sheriffs. If they were negotiators, then they're going to be more oriented towards, favoring negotiations as an initial start. So again, it's informal survey, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of informal kind of surveys or knowledge, my strong sense is that those attracted to the discipline of negotiations are typically not on the management fast track.
Yes.
Think of a very strident, militaristic type tactical commander, and you think of Columbo for the negotiator. Right. Not the blue flamer trying to, make a name for himself and move up, just somebody kind of comfortable, and what, I've often been asked, what makes a good negotiator? Well, a good interviewer, a good interrogator, someone that can help diffuse situations before they get out of hand. Yeah. Those are kind of the skills we're looking for, a people person.
Yeah.
And that's what carries the day, because we all know at the end of the day, people come out peacefully because we've created a relationship of trust. That and nothing else.
Yeah, yeah. The martial artists, they learn to fight, defend themselves, so they probably won't have to. They can with confidence walk away from it. So I'm sorry to upset you and kind of be on the way. And then if they're pushed to it, they'll live up to that, situation, no doubt. And I think it's the same with negotiators. We're trained police officers, and if the circumstances dictate it, then we can, rise to the occasion, no doubt. But it's the talk down before the takedown. With negotiators, I think. And it's we want to go home at night, bottom line. If we are going in, we can get hurt, right? Or worse. So the tactical teams don't necessarily see it that way. And I can speak to that on a qualitative approach, because my background is I spent 16 years with the tactical team in New York
City. With the SU, before we get into HMT, yeah.
Yeah, most people know it as a SWAT team. We called it the Emergency Service Unit.
You were behind the rifle for countless incidents.
Yeah. And then my last 14 years, I was a commander of a hostage team. So I can tell you that from a qualitative perspective, that the SWAT teams are the Marines of the police department, right? The final option, as they call them. And the Marines don't need any help from negotiators, certainly. Thank you. So it's it's going back to the point that we have to negotiate. A lot of times I'd get to a scene in New York, and I knew all the ESU guys and gals. And hey, Jack, thanks for coming. Wait downstairs. I said, well, I can go back at them now. It helped that I was a lieutenant also, and I'm dealing with other lieutenants and captains even and above. But And I'd have to sell it. I said, you know what? We're directed to be here by the police commissioner. If the job goes terribly wrong, and it's documented that we're here, it's memorialized on the radio that we're here, the first question I'm going to ask to you is why you had negotiators on the scene and they didn't negotiate. Problem.
You didn't
Yeah.
use them. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny you show up, oh, the mouth Marines are here.
Yeah.
And I used to respond by saying, yeah, I'm here to keep you safe. Well, what do you mean? I don't need to keep me safe.
Yeah, I'm the Marines, yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, and you know, all the courses I taught at the FBI Academy, the National Crisis Negotiation course, in almost every single class, we would have a police officer attending from some department around the states who typically would bring with him or her a sad story about an officer having lost their life at an incident. And I would put them aside and say, hey, would you be comfortable sharing that details of that incident with the class? And they would almost always say yes. And when I would hear the story, I was always taken aback by how many of these stories where a police officer lost their lives, where I quickly came to the conclusion of saying, why did they go in? There was no compelling reason to go in, which brings us back to our main objectives in negotiations. It's nice when we get a bad guy to surrender, and it's wonderful when we rescue a hostage. But most importantly, we keep police officers alive. And that's why this discipline is so critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want all our people to go home to their families at night.
Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed is when a situation is particularly dangerous, I mean, there's been a loss of life, there's been a serious ability of the perpetrator to inflict harm on us, I get a lot more support from the tactical people than when it's sort of, you know, there's just a mope in there, we'll go get him and so forth. But when it's really dangerous, say, yeah, you guys keep doing what you're doing, you know. So
Yeah.
I think there's an awareness there too.
I believe that also. Yeah.
Do you think that took time, Gary, to get that? Because it sounds like trust even had to be engendered between the cohorts in your agency. In other words, here's the negotiation function. Here's the role relationship that you're going to have on an incident. And now there are going to be incidents where you work together. It would seem to me that trust had to be engendered and credibility needed to be engendered by the negotiation function to the force use function.
Well,
Is that a fair appraisal?
I think it is. And I've been in many situations, I know Jack have, where the tactical guys have been protecting me.
Right.
Because I'm up closer than I would prefer to be.
Right.
And they're making sure that I don't get too close and endanger myself, or they're protecting me. So, you know, we rely on each other. I mean, in a classic hostage kind of situation, you know, the threat of force is a tool that helps negotiations succeed.
Clausewitz wrote it.
You know,
Absolutely.
and that's important to keep in mind. In other cases, an excessive display of force can work as an impediment to creating relationship.
Yep.
So there's a balance, and the more we understand each other and our way of operating and our capabilities, we're you know, more likely to avoid conflicts that inhibit the best outcome we want.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. Of course, with that balance that Gary just spoke about, you have to have a strong tactical presence in place in order to have some impact as a negotiator, because it serves as a motivator.
Right.
So if you don't want to talk to me, the negotiator, I'm going to have to talk to them. And as they look out those windows and they see those guns and the machine guns and the vests and the helmets, the battering rams, more likely than not, they'll turn back. I prefer to talk to you. Thank you. Let's talk.
Yeah.
And also, they need to be there at the ready. If they have to make an immediate entry, you know, shots are starting to be fired. They have to get in there quickly. They have to be there to get in there, you know, hopefully to resolve that. So I think it's important and critical to have that strong tactical presence in place.
Yeah. You know, back in the Atlanta prison riot back in the late 80s, finally, the FBI was finally able to get an inmate representative to come out and talk. And we purposely marched him down a hallway with our big, burly, well-equipped tactical guys lined up in the hallway with their sophisticated weaponry. And the eyes of this inmate kind of opened like saucers, you know, saying, oh, maybe I should talk to these nice people.
Right.
So I don't have to get introduced to these people in a more intimate way. You know?
There you go.
And so it's
to the point.
But there is always a balance of a show of force versus an actual use of force.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to really understand the balance and be careful how that is played.
Yeah.
It's an image of outcomes to the person. You know, I mean, one obviously being less desirable than the other in the end. And I would imagine the presence of that capability also helps the people who are not part of that group, the negotiators, and maybe other people on the ground, feel safer and more willing to do their job because this capacity is there if needed.
When we talk about demonstrating the contrast between force and talk, I'm reminded of the 1996 Montana Freeman siege, an anti-government group. It's 3 years after Waco. The FBI was still reeling from the criticism of Waco, and the adversaries are held up on this expansive ranch property were also aware of Waco. They were not fearful of FBI intervention, correctly reading the tea leaves that we didn't want another bad outcome. So how could we nudge them to come out and talk and go for a resolution? And they were very resistant to that. So we did a couple novel things, and one of them was a great idea one of our guys came up with. We had this 3-strand barbed wire fence between our closest observation post and one of the buildings they were in. Open wheat field, fence through the middle of it. We went forward and we built a gate. No road there. And we came back. Now you're inside. What do you think? Why would somebody build a gate right here? The presumption is they want to drive through the gate. That's all we did. We never made a threat. We just simply went up, we built the gate, and we came back. The other thing we did is we borrowed 2 armored personnel carriers. The FBI didn't have any then. And we got them from local sheriffs. We painted them black and stenciled FBI on them. One of them didn't even run, but we drove them through the middle of town on a flatbed truck, and it made the news. So the Freeman inside saying, "Oh shit, they're
Yeah.
They're getting ready
bringing
to go.
in." So there was 3 or 4 things like that we did where we didn't encroach, didn't engage in aggressive activity, but we demonstrated maybe a growing willingness and preparation to do so, which brought them to the table.
Yes.
And opened up negotiations. And that's, I think, where a lot of departments go wrong. They don't understand the balance between using this in a clever, appropriate way and going too far with it.
And there's even, I would say, ideologues, Gary, that would completely shun or not support that kind of approach at all in the crisis space. In other words, there can be absolutely no imagery of a potential negative outcome or a potential use of control. It must be exclusively supportive. And when I hear people like that speaking that message, I generally conclude this is someone who's never been in a situation where they actually have to influence someone who's completely entrenched. There is either time pressure or serious stakes that must also be considered. And we can't do the only supportive kind of approach where we're endlessly patient, negotiative, amenable, that there has to be something to move the human being. And that's a wonderful way that you just described.
Yeah, and in that particular case, and I'm not faulting her for it, but Attorney General Giannarino at the time said, we don't want this to end violently. So when we're telling the Freeman, we need to get serious about finding a way out of this because, there's children in there with you. We don't want anybody hurt. He said, well, the Attorney General said nobody was going to get hurt. And I mean, she didn't intend to undercut us, and you couldn't even criticize her for that. But that's the kind of thing that they pick up on. So you have to be very careful the messages being conveyed and what they see. There are people out there, and this is what we ran into in Waco, where they feel tighten the noose, continue to increase the pressure. That's what draws people out. Well, that can also be counterproductive.
Yes.
What we call the paradox of power.
Yeah.
The more you apply it, the more likely you are to get resistance.
Yes.
So these are things we have to keep in mind.
And we can get into the paradox of power on the next segment.